Oscar Wilde once said, "Responsibility is what we expect from somebody else." This is very true. Most people dread accepting responsibility. That's just a fact of life, and we can see it in operation every day. We can see ourselves getting hot under the collar when the dentist keeps us waiting, and we're sitting there reading old magazines when our appointment was 30 minutes ago. And we don't stop to think that we forgot to mail in this month's mortgage payment. We can see ourselves growing angrier and angrier because a business contact is supposed to call at noon, and here it is almost 2 o'clock, and the phone still refuses to ring. But we don't stop to think about the calls we ourselves have forgotten to return while we've been so busy fuming. We can see ourselves writing an angry letter to the airline because a flight was delayed, but we don't write an angry letter to ourselves when we're late for something, even though that might not be a bad idea at all. Yes, we can see avoidance of responsibility all the time in both our personal and professional lives. And here's something else we can see just as often. We can see that most people aren't as successful as they wish they were. Do you see there's a connection between these two very common phenomena? I certainly do, and by the end of this session, I hope you'll agree with me. I hope you'll understand that it's in your best interests to take responsibility for everything you do. But that's only the beginning. I'm also going to suggest that many times it's even best to accept responsibility for the mistakes of others, especially when you're in a managerial or leadership role. I can hear you saying, "What? Accept responsibility for someone else's mess-ups? Why would I want to do something like that?" Well, that's a fair enough question, and over the next few minutes I'll try to answer it. I've always felt that accepting responsibility is one of the highest forms of human maturity. A willingness to be accountable, to put yourself on the line, is really the defining characteristic of adulthood. Anyone who has raised children knows how true this is. Just look at a baby during the first few years of life. Every gesture, every facial expression, every tentative word has one message for the baby's parents. The message is, "I am totally dependent on you. I can't do anything for myself even if I try. I can't be held responsible for the consequences. After all, I'm just a baby." 10 or 12 years later, of course, as the boy or girl enters adolescence, this message to the parents will be very different. It will sound something like this: "Why don't you just leave me alone? I want to be totally independent. I don't want to do anything but think about myself. I certainly don't want to accept any responsibility for anything beyond my own very well-defined needs and desires." It's only when we're at last grown up that the first two messages, "I'm totally dependent on you," and "I'm totally independent of you," finally turn into, "You can depend on me," which is the truly adult outlook. Strange as it may seem, of course, there are people in their 30s and 40s who are still acting like adolescents, and there are even people in their 40s and 50s who are still acting like babies as far as their attitude toward responsibility is concerned. These kinds of people can be hard to have around, especially if you have to work with them. But the large number of people who shirk responsibility can also provide opportunities for you if you are determined to be different. If you decide to be one of the few who embraces responsibility, you can lead, and you will deserve to lead. Churchill said, "Responsibility is the price of greatness." And in my opinion, it's really a rather small price to pay. Let me be more specific about exactly what is involved in becoming a responsible person. It means, first of all, that you accept the consequences of your actions. But I'll go even further than that. Responsibility means you look to yourself as the source of everything that happens to you. It means that you assume command regardless of the hardships you may have undergone early in life, or the prejudice you may have encountered, or the dozens of people who may have failed to understand you. Do you detect a note of irony in my voice, or perhaps a note of sarcasm? Do I sound hard-hearted? Do I seem to be denying the existence of difficult childhoods, or of prejudice, or of people who are insensitive to the needs of others? Well, that is certainly not my intention, nor is it my belief. I'm saying that regardless of the presence of those negative influences in your life, the best thing you can do, the most empowering thing, the strongest thing, and ultimately the wisest thing, is to accept responsibility for your own destiny, plain and simple. The benefits of this approach to life have been proven in some pretty dramatic ways. People who have been afflicted by serious illness, for example, appear to have a better chance of recovery if they decide to take responsibility for what has happened to them, despite the fact that it would be easier and perhaps even more reasonable to simply see themselves as victims of fate. There's a man, let's call him John, who had been healthy and vigorous all his life, who had started and sold businesses in a number of different fields before finally deciding to enter law school in his late 40s. At that time, however, he began to suffer some severe health problems. All his life, his main focus had been on success and achievement, and he really hadn't paid much attention to what was happening to his body. For years, John subsisted largely on a diet of donuts and black coffee. And because he traveled a great deal, he also consumed large amounts of airplane food. Inexorably, he was gaining weight, 5 pounds one year, 10 pounds the next year, 15 pounds the year after that. Of course, John responded by opening a number of stores that featured clothing for overweight men. And he even used himself in his advertisements. In retrospect, this was probably a mistake. It gave him an incentive to gain even more weight. One year, John gained 20 pounds and actually bragged about that fact in his newspaper ads. Then he was diagnosed with severe diabetes. Although John's physicians assured him that the disease was brought about as much by heredity as by behavioral patterns, he was the kind of man who believed that he was the captain of his own ship, not a common sailor taking orders from someone higher up. He was a man of strong character. And now, in the face of this new challenge, John resolved to begin taking responsibility for his own well-being. As he explains it, all my adult life I've been preoccupied with supporting my family and getting ahead financially. It was a sense of responsibility that I felt, and to a large extent I have lived up to it. But I can see now that responsibility is beginning to express itself in a different way. Providing for my family is not just a matter of dollars and cents anymore. It's a matter of staying alive. It's my health, and it's the health of my family that's at stake as well. It was clear that John had indeed gotten himself locked into some well-defined thought patterns, but the most important one was the way he saw himself as the cause of everything that happened. The doctors had told him his diabetes might have come on even if he hadn't been overeating and overworking. But John knew that was nonsense. And as far as his kids were concerned, there have been a lot of news reports documenting the fact that American kids in general are heavier than they used to be. They just don't get the same amount of exercise as the children of previous generations. John could have resigned himself to the fact that his kids, like just about all kids today, are going to watch television, play video games, and eat junk food, whether he gained weight or not. But he didn't. Baloney, he said. It's all my fault, and I'm going to do something about it. In fact, I'm going to do a lot about it. And he did do a lot about it. John radically changed his diet and his lifestyle. He began ordering vegetarian meals on plane flights. He became a fitness enthusiast and ran several marathons. Sooner or later, all of us face situations in which we must decide whether to accept responsibility for a problem or look for ways to avoid responsibility. Assuming that you have in fact done something that has caused a problem of some kind, let's look at the various options and decisions that are now open to you. First, there's the role played by intention. In other words, was the outcome of your action what you intended it to be? And if it was not, should you still accept responsibility for that outcome? This is a very serious issue in the way we think about responsibility in our society. In many areas of criminal law, for instance, the intention to commit a crime must be present in order for the accused to be held criminally responsible. This intention is something quite different from mere negligence. But we don't have to enter a courtroom to see the important role intention plays in accepting responsibility ourselves or assigning it to others. Don't you remember when you were a kid and you left the screen door open so that the cat ran outside and was lost all afternoon? What did you say to avoid responsibility? You said, "I didn't mean to do that." You said, "It was an accident." As I pointed out earlier, there are lots of people who still use these childlike rationalizations well into their middle age. But if and when you decide you want to be an adult, you begin to see the whole question of intention as nothing more than another opportunity for excuse-making, and you should refuse to participate in it. The great thing about excuses, and the really dangerous thing about them, is that no matter what happens, excuses are always there waiting to be used. Anybody can have an excuse for absolutely anything, and people have never been better at it than they are today. But the downside of excuses, even good ones, is that nobody really believes them. I don't care what people tell you, if you make excuses, they're going to know it, and they're going to think less of you. But if you refuse to rely on excuses, people are going to know that too, and they'll admire you for it. This is especially true in business. One of the classic examples happened about 15 years ago. A widely advertised healthcare product from a leading manufacturer was shown to be unsafe, and the company responded by pulling every single box off the shelves at a cost of millions of dollars. Was the company destroyed? Hardly. If they had done anything else, there would have been a tremendous loss of confidence, both on the part of consumers and employees. Instead, there was honest acceptance of responsibility for a mistake, and the public image of the company was dramatically enhanced. Contrast this with what happened recently to a leading manufacturer of computer chips. When a new microprocessor didn't perform up to expectations, the company made excuses. It was a minor problem, something that would crop up once in a lifetime, and so forth. Were these excuses valid? Maybe, maybe not. But it doesn't really matter, does it? So many people use excuses, but nobody really buys them. It's our modern version of the fable about the boy who cried wolf. In this case, the computer chip manufacturer finally took so much heat that they did replace the processors, which is what they should have done in the first place.